Well, and then they were punishing reporters. DOJ was putting people like me on lists to watch us, to make sure that they knew what kind of, what when we were writing, and they were actually employing left wing media hit pieces like Media Matters, for example. They would send them information and say, "Can you address this?" And then all of a sudden, the emails are there, and then the Media Matters would write a hit piece on someone who was writing about this story or trying to discredit them or that kind of thing. And other things, like I remember this distinctly, is when I went to an ATF briefing at ATF headquarters because they were giving a presentation about new Mexico numbers and recovered firearms in Mexico. And after the presentation was over, I just said, okay, so how many of these guns were part of Fast and Furious? Because you keep saying you're finding American guns at these crime scenes in Mexico, but you guys trafficked thousands of guns to Mexico. So how many of these are part of that operation and how many are not? Of course, didn't answer the question. And when I was leaving, these two ATF agents they were blocking the stairway to get out of the building. So I had to go around them, and then they watched me leave. And then I went to a book party for a friend, and these two ATF agents show up there. And I don't remember if they were invited or not because it wasn't my party, but then they just cornered me to talk about the operation.
And not in a good way, in an intimidating way.
Yeah, and they were trying to be they weren't giving me information. It wasn't as bad as you portray it as, and trying to talk to me about it at this book party in DC. It was just weird.
Yeah.
So things like that started happening. But what they were doing to people like John Dodson, moving them around, reassigning them, retaliating against them and their families. What the guys who came out publicly to talk about did was, the things that they had to go through as a result of that, just awful. And I think about the last 4 years and all the anonymous sourcing that we've seen in media. And there's obviously a need for anonymous sourcing. There's some of it in this book, but these guys laid it all on the line to talk about what was going on, and they were punished for it. And so just
these whistleblower protection things all of a sudden don't apply to if you're on the opposite side of a certain narrative or issue.
Yeah.
And for people that don't know about Fast and the Furious, it's like a 5-minute rundown. So essentially what it is the government paying people, I guess, to go into these gun stores, buy 20 rifles, whatever it was, with cash, and telling the owners, hey, you better cooperate with us. Don't say anything about this. Let them go. It's all part of this operation. And did that over and over and over again. Thousands of weapons end up out there, out of our control.
Yeah.
And they want to trace the idea. And the Bush administration had something earlier, right, that was kind of similar, but then they're like, no, this is not right, shut it down, or something years before.
And there was more tracing of the guns, but it was an initial operation that got blown up into a bigger one under Fast and Furious. Basically, essentially, what ATF did was they had informants, but they knew that there were certain people in Phoenix who were working on behalf of drug cartels and paying cash. So they would come into these gun stores and say, I need 40 AK-47s. And the gun shop owner would call ATF and be like, hey, this is weird. What should I do? And they would say, well, you need to sell to this guy because we're watching him and we're tracing the guns. They were promised over and over again that they were going to trace the guns, that they knew where they were going, that they weren't going to let them go south into Mexico. That was the deal. And so the gun shop is like, okay, well, I want to help. And ATF controls whether they operate or not. They control their license. They control when they come in and get inspected. It's basically dangling it out in front of them. Oh, you don't want to cooperate with us? Well, we know how to shut your business down. So you have these gun shops cooperating and allowing these straw purchasers, which is illegal, because they knew this guy was buying guns for cartel. He's not buying 40 AK-47s for himself, right? To come in, pay with cash, and then he would leave with a truck full of guns. And then ATF would sometimes follow them to a stash house. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they knew that they were going across the border and they wouldn't do anything about it. And they weren't telling Border Patrol about it. So they did that 2,500 times. They trafficked thousands of guns, 50 calibers. One of the 50 caliber rifles that was found in El Chapo's lair was from Fast and Furious. It was trafficked as part of this program. And so what they said was, well, we keep finding these, the narrative was, and the Washington Post did a big story about this, that, we're finding all these guns in Mexico at crime scenes that are traced back to these gun shops in Phoenix. But what the Washington Post wasn't told by the same ATF supervisors, not the agents, but the supervisors who are quoted in the story, they say, well, that's because people are, taking advantage and buying guns in America under our loose gun laws and trafficking them to Mexico for cartels, all the while they were the ones who were initiating the trafficking, paying the traffickers, purposely allowing these guns to go south. And then when they show up at bloody crime scenes where people are murdered, like hundreds of people are murdered in Mexico, they blame it on the gun dealers who were intimidated into doing this in the first place because ATF told them to do it. And so they had this narrative about, we keep finding all these guns at these crime scenes and they're tracing back to these gun stores. And it's like, well, they're chasing back to the gun stores because you're telling them to sell them.
It's so crazy. Do you think that was the intent the whole time was to just be able to prove their narrative of these 90% of guns at crime scenes there, and they just wanted to, let's prove this, let's get some data on it, so we're going to make it happen ourselves? Or was it just something that got out of control and happened to support their narrative?
Based on the email traffic that I saw, they were doing this to push more regulation. Like, we need to be able to prove that guns from America are going to Mexico.
So let's put them
They
in
would
there.
say that the reason they implemented Fast and Furious is because they wanted to trace guns into the cartel so they could get to the top of the cartel. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows that's not how it works. And if they were really interested in tracing guns, they would have put tracking devices on them.
And they did it on like one or two
and
guns.
They did it. They did it on 2 out of 2,500, and it was like John Dodson making like, a homemade GPS device that died a day after the gun was gone. So their whole facade was, well, our plan was to trace these guns into Mexico, to trace where they were going, and to make it up through the cartel to take down the cartel. But they weren't tracing anything. They were losing track of things. They weren't working with Mexican authorities to track any of this stuff. They didn't tell Mexico about it. And so if you're really trying to trace guns in Mexico through a cartel, you might want to have some like law enforcement in Mexico helping you with the program. They never did.